Great to see you. It was great to see some of you yesterday at Owen from afar, throwing candy at everyone. Well, I know we're at 12:05, so I want to get started. But first, thank you all for joining. I know you all have busy Fridays and weeks at Owen, but especially wanted to thank our 3 alumni panelists, Morgan Scott from Amazon, Matt Riley from Mars Pet Care, and Holly Hardesty from EJ Gallo. Thank you all so much for taking the time to come back and share your insight. Also have a few colleagues on the Zoom. For those I don't know, I'm Amanda Fend. I'm one of the coaches in the CMC. Brooke Meisner, Sandy Kinnett, and Courtney Fain, fellow coaches, all joining. So thank you guys. And I'm going to jump in and I'm going to let the alums each quickly introduce themselves, but also wanted to note that please share any questions at any time. This will be informal. The goal is really just to hear from people who will be at the other side of the table from you, maybe not specifically this year, or maybe they will, but they have been part of that process for their companies. They were once in your shoes, now they're on the other side. And so just bring a really great perspective on what, their perspective is when they're interviewing or talking to students, what their companies are thinking and looking for. And so, who better to hear it from than people who understand what you're going through, but now are on the other side. So if you all want to introduce yourselves, Morgan, if you want to start.
Sure. So my name is Morgan Scott. I am a senior marketing manager at Amazon. I focus on the automotive category within the retail space. I have been here for 1 year and 3 months now. I graduated in the MBA class of 2019. Prior to MBA, I did something really different. I was working as an exhibitions manager at Christie's, which is a luxury fine art auction house in New York. And while I was at MBA, actually did my summer internship in the marketing team at EJ Gallo, where Holly works now. I had a great experience there too. So I have a lot of experience with, transitioning my career from one thing to something very different. And I'm happy to answer all of your questions today.
Thanks, Matt. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So, hey, everyone, my name is Matt Riley. I graduated from Owen in 2019 with Morgan. We were both in the class of 19. So I work at Mars Pet Care on the disruptive growth brands. So it's our dry dog segment, and my team works on some of the smaller, more nimble and experimental brands within Mars's portfolio. I worked in management consulting for 3 years before going to Owen. But really wanted to get into marketing and really couldn't find a way outside of heading back to school. So that's what I did, had a great time. I interned with Mars on the innovation team over the summer and have loved working here thus far. So looking forward to chatting with you guys.
Thanks, Matt. Holly.
Hi, everyone. My name's Holly Hardesty. If you saw me walk away from my camera in this crazy work from home situation that we're in, it's because I had to go do something for my baby. So times have changed since I was at Owen. I graduated in 2013. Met my husband at Owen, which was fun. And after that, we moved out to California, where I now work for E&J Gallo Winery. Prior to that, I was in the nonprofit world doing program management and grant writing. So I was a total career changer, going from the nonprofit world to the for-profit world, working in corporate finance. So I've had a great career at Gallo, 7 years and going strong. Hope to have a long career there and looking forward to answering all of your questions. And oh, by the way, I now work from home in Nashville, Tennessee. So I'm right down the street, likely from some of you in East Nashville.
The dream, back in Nashville.
Back in Nashville.
Well, thank you guys. And what I meant to say before was if you have any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the chat at any time and we'll get to them, or just feel free to jump in and unmute yourself and just say, hey, I have a quick question. I have questions that we think are things that students are often wondering about, but would rather you get to ask things that you're thinking. So I'll kick it off though with one, which for each of you, what are things just overarchingly or specifically that people do in an interview that set them apart in a positive or a negative way?
I can start. I think there's people that make themselves easy to interview and people that make themselves hard to interview. People that are easy to interview, for me at least, do the work for me and really speak to their own individual contributions. I know when we're at Amazon, we always are trying to understand what a person has individually contributed to a project or a team, on top of maybe the larger achievements that the team has done. And I know sometimes that's difficult to parse out when you're coming from a more junior position. But that's always really, really helpful for me if someone can kind of be very direct, cut to the chase, be like, this was the larger project, this was my contribution, and this was the outcome of my contribution. This is how it contributed to the larger project. And Holly, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think something that's important, is to just be authentically yourself. Just, I don't know. I feel like when I was a first year and I was interviewing, I was trying, and especially coming from the nonprofit world, I felt like I had this chip on my shoulder. Like I had to show up and try to prove that I know as much as I possibly did. But I think that just being authentically yourself, whether that's maybe, data nerdiness and showing how enthusiastic you are about that, or you're really excited about the industry, or just flexing what your strengths are, I think is so important. Also, coming as somebody who is very nervous going into interviews, I'm always very impressed by people who are calm and confident. That's a hard thing to do. Whenever somebody tells me like, oh, just be calm and confident, that's not easily achievable, but it's certainly something that makes everybody else feel calm and comfortable as well. So I think that that's important. And I just want to make sure I hit my last point here. I think just being generally prepared and interested is also important. So, I think it's cool when people walk in and they know a little bit about the wine industry or they're asking questions. That shows that you're interested and prepared. I wouldn't go in trying to teach the person something. You likely won't know more about the wine industry than me, just saying. So I think that anytime that you come in showing interest, but also hoping to learn something from the interviewer, it is a good thing to do as well.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add besides those two great points from y'all is the majority of the time, your resume was selected from a group of very, a competitive group of individuals all looking for the same job. So from my perspective, I know that you have the chops to make it in the job. You're going to a great school, for whatever reason, your resume jumped out. So for me, it's do what you can to make things feel more natural and conversational, because a lot of companies, particularly private companies, so this might be more for EJ Gallo and Mars, it's a much more community atmosphere and it's very relationship based. So if you can, like Holly and Morgan were saying, kind of get your authentic self through and let your personality speak to the interview, not just kind of, what you can bring to the nuts and bolts of the job, that's always a positive, being able to feel like you belong and, have just a good conversation.
Thanks, guys. That was great. Similarly, I guess that we're talking about during the interview, but when you're thinking of before the interview or after the interview, what are specific things people have done or do that set them apart that you're like, wow, I was so impressed by that, or that you're like, that like didn't really sit well? What are things before and after?
Yeah, I can start with this one because whenever current students reach out to me, when they ask for what's something that they can be actively doing now to set themselves apart, there's some of the lowest hanging fruit, which is really easy, is attend the events and send thank you notes after, because it sounds surprising, but companies do track all that stuff. Because if we're looking at applicants and It's down to two, individuals, two resumes that are neck and neck. The person that we can, quantitatively see have expressed an interest in the company that we're working for, that person's going to get it every single time. So if it's, two people are neck and neck and one person has attended every info session, all the coffee chats, they've been in touch with alumni, and the other person is just maybe more of a resume drop, go with the person who has expressed or who's gone out of their way to express interest in the company.
That's a
I can
great
go
reminder.
next. So something that has really stood out to me, and it's something that Owen encourages, is just networking, obviously reaching out and scheduling virtual coffee chats, and then also listing those people in your cover letter, so that anybody who is looking at your resume and looking at your cover letter, they're scanning through all these things, but names jump off the page. So I think that additional step of making sure that you include it in your cover letter as to why you're interested in the company, and you had these great discussions, then I think that can certainly help.
Also, I think it's important to know what the company values, and sort of align it with your personal stories. Like, for example, I think Amazon, so like Amazon and E&J Gallo are really different companies, right? E&J Gallo is like a family-owned company, private. They really value this community and relationship-driven touch points. Meanwhile, Amazon's like really huge, data-driven, and they are really guided on their leadership principles. And so the interview I did for Gallo was really different than the interview I did for Amazon, and how I prepared for it was really different, even though I'm the same person and I have the same stories. So it's really trying to get a good grasp on what the interview process is like at that company, how you can align your stories with their values to really like make yourself shine, and seem like a very good culture fit for that company, because that's important everywhere. And then afterwards, just to echo Matt, always try to send thank you notes, and be as appreciative as possible for the opportunity to interview.
Thank you notes are not a lost art. That's good or thank you emails, could be an email. That's great advice. Do you all have any questions or things that you have been thinking about, students attending? You can feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm looking at you guys, and I know I've talked to many of you, and you're all doing an awesome job networking and doing things. So interviewing will be the next phase.
I can start with a question. I think just looking at the timeline of how things are, it's likely that interviews will be over Zoom or some other form like this. What's something that we can do to stand out in a virtual setting?
I think I can take this one. Virtual is awesome because you can be extra prepared. So like, you can have, no one's I don't think companies encourage this, but like, have your stories laid out, have note cards or visual cues so that you don't necessarily get nervous, or if you get off track in an interview, you can stay on track. Like, use the virtual format to your advantage. Always like test your background, make sure it looks professional. Make sure that, you have water and are extra prepared. I feel like virtual can be a double-edged sword, because it does seem sort of unnatural, but you also have to realize that the person on the other side is a human too, and it's probably a little bit unnatural for them. So I would just say use the virtualness of it all to be able to have like a little cockpit of information for yourself, and have things that make you shine during the interview, and have little cues. Like, for example, I did a virtual interview for Amazon. I had like the leadership principles written on the whiteboard in the library, for example. There's things like that are good ways to prepare, and are ways to honestly make yourself feel calmer because you're dealing with a new format.
I have a question. So, we've been to a lot of info sessions for a ton of companies between like August, September, October, November. And a lot of interviews aren't until January. So I've been to a lot of info sessions that may have been in September, and I knew nothing about them. And I went, I'm like, cool. And now that it's getting applying, I'm thinking, oh, I am really interested in that. Is it weird to then follow up like 2 months later to, hey, like now I want to chat? What's everyone's thoughts on that?
Do it. I would say, a lot of people that that were in your info session have also been MBAs. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I applied to everything, so as you're kind of understanding more of what you want to do, it's never, anytime is good. Anytime is good. I did so much over the holidays. So the fact that you're thinking about this October 30th is awesome. So I would say go for it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I do have a question. I know you mentioned with interviews, like being your authentic self. A couple different sessions that we've had, we've gotten the advice, make sure you're polished, you rehearse your answers, and you make sure that you understand where you're going. Is there a risk to almost being too polished in sacrificing that authenticity, and almost maybe it's better to be more natural than so rehearsed? And you think maybe interviewers may see through that rehearsed nature?
I don't know that I would ever advise someone to not be prepared. I think that's a good question. And you can definitely run the risk of sounding like a robot, but I think there's just another level of preparedness in building it, like just practicing those answers and practicing to make them sound authentic, and then be ready for built-in questions, or, oh, that sounds interesting, can you dive in a little bit more there, and be willing to go down, separate rabbit holes and talk about different things. I would advise against memorization and more just, practicing and doing your best to make things come through as if, it's a prepared conversation, I guess. I don't know, Holly, and
I think you said it perfectly. I would say that, again, I'm like reflecting on myself in your shoes 10 years ago. But I feel like when I would get into interviews, I would go so fast and I wouldn't let people ask questions. But I think just like, intentionally slowing down and, getting down to your, maybe you can memorize your bullet points, but not a speech. Not sentences, just, hey, I want to highlight that I did this and this and this, is the right way to go. But for me, I just always had to remember to slow down to allow people to ask questions is what I would recommend.
Awesome. Thank you.
To that, kind of a follow-up to that, I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, this X company is my top company. Can I tell them that in the interview? Like, can I indicate like this is my priority? And I'm like, don't do that if it's not true. But like, how do you guys feel about that? If people are like this, like really, it's authentic and they're really like putting it out there.
It depends. I would caution any MBA from getting fixated on one company, just because it's like a recipe for heartbreak. But I think that it's fine to say that something's your top goal. I think an MBA is so short, and to Holly's point earlier, you have to take full advantage of the moment that you have in this moment to pivot your career. That being said, if something's your top company, you better have really good reasons why it's your top company, because the follow-up question is going to be like, so why? Like, what about us makes it so great? And if you don't have really great answers for that, I think it would almost be a negative rather than a positive. So, if you have a top company and you're really dead set on it, just make sure that you really understand why. And it's not necessarily the brand name or the prestige or some sort of lifestyle aspect, but something about that company and that company's culture and the role that you're interviewing for specifically that makes it your top.
Yeah, I agree. And there's kind of like two ways to talk about it being your top company, because I know it's kind of a sales process for both sides. You're selling yourself and we're selling the company. So we know that people exaggerate in interviews, and we know that, we'll probably hear people tell us that it's their top company and it's not. So we take that with a grain of salt, likely. But if you have a relationship with someone who works there, and, you know, for Mars, for example, I got pretty close with a couple of the associates that weren't necessarily directly involved with the recruiting process, but, you know, we would talk semi-frequently, and I told them, you know, I really want to be at Mars. This is what I'm looking for. That's a different way to tell it, because, you know, you're being real with that individual. You already have a relationship, so they know that you're being honest. And that's kind of a better way for that word to travel. Obviously, that opportunity doesn't present itself in every scenario, but that's just to build kind of on what Morgan was talking about. It's like there are kind of some do's and don'ts. It's really a judgment call.
I would only add that, you know, if you're going to go there, I would wait until the final round. You know, I wouldn't go in guns blazing with in your screening interview. And you could probably articulate the answer even better at that point, if it's natural. You'll probably get questions along the way of, you know, where else are you interviewing? And I don't know, I just feel like all of the actions leading up to that point will make it clear that you're interested. If you've networked, if you're prepared, if, you know, if it's a good fit in conversation. So that's just some food for thought as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, guys. Any other audience questions?
I had something real quick just to follow up on what Holly just said. So when you do get the question of how, like, what other companies are you applying to? Since, I mean, we're going to apply to a lot of places, how honest should we be if we're like, I don't know if there's a good number, like I've applied to 20 places and like, this is the one place I want or something. Like if I say, oh yeah, I applied this, or just like list a couple.
I think people, on the one hand, people get it, because if they've been an MBA, they've been in your shoes. On another hand, you don't want to be like, well, I've applied to 25 places and this is number 19 and, you know, I'm here, you know, I'm alive. Don't do that. But I think you can respond in like a focused way. Be like, you know, I'm targeting CPG and marketing roles, and I like your company because of these reasons. You know, I think there's tactful ways to answer that question, because people know that you're applying to a lot of stuff, and they also know they don't hold that against you. Just be tactful.
Yeah, I'd second that. Just keep it, if you are going to share the other companies that you're interviewing with, keep it in the industry. So don't tell, you know, Amazon or EJ Gallo or Mars, or, you know, like, yeah, I'm applying to Bain. I really want to do consulting. It's like, you know,
yeah.
keep it CPG focused, like Morgan said, if you're applying to CPG.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So to everyone's favorite interview format, the STAR format, we all are familiar with that. Like, tell me about a time when something happened. When you guys are listening to responses with to STAR format stories, what are you really listening for, and which of those components like do you think is most important?
I can start with this one. So one of the values at Gallo is humility. And I think that it's important for us, you know, that we see that in candidates. And, you know, it's possible in your STAR format to also sprinkle in some wisdom that you've gained about mistakes that you've made and lessons learned, and that shows maturity. And it shows that you've learned some valuable lessons that you can take to any company that you go to. So, you know, STAR format is important, but also just being humble along the way, if possible, is great, I think. That's what I'm looking for. Of course, and obviously result is huge. And I think it's the most important thing. And for whatever reason, myself included, always kind of like trailed off because it's the last thing and you're just trying to get through the questions. So I would certainly make sure that you're highlighting your results and be ready for follow-up questions on those results.
Yeah, I think the STAR format and answering interview questions in the STAR format's like honestly like the most important skill you learn as an MBA, because it's something that you basically need for the rest of your career if you ever want to change companies. I would echo Holly. Results are super important. I, like Holly, would always forget. I would be really focused on the tasks and what I did, but then you wouldn't necessarily talk about the outcomes. So make sure that you're really following through. Oftentimes when people are interviewing, they're really told to look for star format answers, especially when they're interviewing MBAs. So just practice and figure out ways that you can be, authentically yourself, like we said, but stick to that script. Like oftentimes interviewers will have pieces of paper where they're like filling in what you did for each of the star formats. And so don't underestimate the power of the star format because it's super important.
I'm sure you guys don't miss those days of practicing those stories.
Well, I was interviewing someone the other day and I was like, this man is not putting things in the star format. Like he really needs to get it together.
So it was a good skill. It's a lifelong skill. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
One question for you guys, and I feel like this is a really important part of interviews, but that we all like tends to not be the thing people focus on, is when you ask at the end of an interview, like, do you have any questions for me? Or I feel like that's a very common thing. Like there's time for students to ask questions. What types of questions set people apart? What does someone ask that you're like, wow, that really that was an impressive question?
I can start again with this. I think that I just enjoy the culture questions. I don't know if I've ever been impressed by a question, if that makes sense. I think that I just use that time to really get to know the candidate and for them to get to know us. And I think that any genuine interest in me and my career and, the culture of the company and, what is it like to work in the wine industry and kind of some excitement and enthusiasm around that is what I'm looking for. And I would think that that's, what a lot of people are looking for as well. But I remember going into interviews and trying to knock people's socks off with, hey, I read this article and, this and that. And, it's great to have a discussion about that as well. But I would say that the focus at that point should be more, or I look for more, cultural questions.
Yeah, I think I would say, because the interviewers are just regular people and most people like talking about themselves and their experiences. So one of the questions that I think does particularly well is if you ask them something along the lines of like, can you tell me about a project that you worked on that you're particularly proud of? Or, what's something that you've done in the past year that you think really kind of showcases working at Mars, or, something that you've really enjoyed doing, something that allows them to talk beyond kind of the canned, like what's a day in the life at Mars, or what do you do in a week as an ABM? Something that allows them to talk about something that's actually interesting to them as well. I think allows you as an interviewee to get a little bit more personal insight into what this person is good at, interested, what they like about the job. And it gives the interviewer some time to showcase some things outside of, what is traditionally covered in a regular interview.
I think those are two great points. I think the third one would be to make sure that your your follow-up questions are varied. So don't have the same 2 questions for every interviewer, and make sure that your questions speak to actually things that you actually are interested in, and help actually fact find things that you're trying to look for with the company. Also, always keep your questions positive. Don't have them be negative. I know that when I was an MBA, sometimes people in info sessions would ask really negative questions about the company. So, and I know that this is probably not necessarily something anyone would do in an individual interview, but always try to be positive, be interested, and don't ask the same questions over and over again.
That's great. Yeah, it'd be boring to ask a question you have no interest in hearing and then hearing about it. So that's really good advice. One quick question. So obviously a lot of, not always, but I think sometimes students know who their interviewers will be in advance. And so you can look people up on LinkedIn. And if someone has done a little homework on you and then you're interviewing them, is that, if they bring that up, like how much should they bring it up? Do you feel like it's like, how much is too much? Like, why do you know where I went to college? Or, what is that experience like for you?
I don't know. I would say only bring things up if you have something in common with them. Like, for example, I went to NYU undergrad. And if I saw someone else went to NYU, maybe I would bring that up, but I'm not going to bring up random facts about a person. Just be normal. I feel like interviews, you get really wound up and sometimes you forget what it's like to be a normal person and you forget that you're interviewing with other normal people. So just like, be normal. That's my biggest recommendation.
Yeah, that's a good, that's a good qualifier, because I was gonna say go for it. It's nice to like know that someone did their homework, but Morgan is 1,000,000% right. It would be weird if you were just like, oh yeah, cool, I saw you graduated from like Mount Pisgah High School, like cool. It's like, I don't know. Definitely find the like what Morgan was saying, the how you can link that to the conversation. But definitely check out LinkedIn profiles before interviews, because you never know what little connections you might be able to make.
The only other thing I would add is, when you look at somebody's LinkedIn profile, as we all probably know, you get a little notification saying this person looked at your profile. So the creepiness factor is kind of taken away for me at that point, at least, but I agree, just be normal. Commonalities are a great thing to bring up.
Yeah, maybe invest in LinkedIn Premium for the when you're really interviews, so you can do that anonymously.
I didn't know that was an option.
Oh yeah,
Clearly
yeah.
don't have premium.
I used that 10 years ago.
Yeah, they give you like a month free trial, and I jumped on that when I was in the midst of interviews. I could do some creeping.
Good call. If you learned nothing else today, that is definitely a good call.
That's right.
Any questions, students? Anything we haven't asked yet? I can continue.
I'd like to jump in with a question. This is kind of as a follow-up to Morgan, when you're talking about questions to ask and not being negative about questions. I often in the past have asked, as one of my questions to interviewers, what are some of the challenges you faced in your work? Do you categorize that as a negative question if they talk about some of the less satisfactory things in their life?
No, because challenges can also be really interesting. So like one of my challenges is like the large quantities of data that I have to process, which is a challenge, but like also makes my job really interesting. I think it's more like if you have concerns about like work-life balance, or I don't know, let's say like a location of a firm, like, or I don't know, there's other things that are really specific, and your questions might be like, oh, I saw that your company had some negative press like last year, or like, oh, I see your CEO stepping down. How do you feel about that? There's questions like that where you need to be really tactful so that you don't rub interviewers the wrong way, even though the question might be totally legitimate. Just spin it positively rather than negatively.
Yeah, and I think, Morgan, when Amazon did their info session at Owen, one of our classmates was like, hey, I read an article in the New York Times that says you guys work like 15-hour days, 6 days a week. Is that true? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's more of what she's meaning when it comes to like negative questions. Like,
don't be that guy.
yeah, but personal challenges and stuff, I think that's definitely fair game.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
A quick question too. Do you all give cases? Like, is that part of your process? When you're giving a case, which I know is different than tell me about a time when, what are things that students do during a case that really set them apart or you take notice of?
I can start with this one. I think that, as people are answering the question, there's all kinds of, let's say it's a market sizing question, and there's all kinds of considerations. And I think it's really interesting. Every single person answers it differently. And I kind of challenge people and I say, well, have you thought about this or that? And if people clam up, that to me shows you can't think on your feet and you can't, engage in conversation, because at any company that you go to, whatever you put on a slide in a meeting will be challenged, and you can expect that. So I think just be open to that, and just expect that you might get some additional information in the case, or you might be challenged in some way, and just approach that with curiosity and say, oh, I hadn't thought of that, and what if we did this and that, and that totally changes the answer. And just approaching it like a conversation that you would have with a coworker. I would say that is what impresses me most with people that can think on their feet.
Yeah, I think so for consulting, I think it's a little bit different. I was mostly interviewing with marketing and tech. But to echo Holly's point, I think, sorry, it's mostly, case questions are mostly to try to understand how the candidate thinks and solves problems. So don't be ashamed or weirded out if you need to take a little bit of time to really collect your thoughts before you answer a case question, because we really want to understand how you approach problems, how if someone challenges you, you react to that, and how you're thinking of multiple different creative aspects and different levers within a business to solve that issue. I know a lot of people get really fixated on perhaps the math portion of a case, where they're trying to, do the math on their head and solve this very specific problems. And it is really helpful to memorize like some of the top formulas around cases, so that you don't get the math wrong and it's not distracting. But mostly people just want to understand how you approach a problem, what is your logic and critical thinking skills within the context of the industry. And if you, not that you would understand the full context of a problem because you don't work at that company yet, but that you understand the different business levers that you can pull to solve that problem, even if it's on a really high level.
That was awesome. Thank you guys. Very, very helpful. Any other questions from the group or fellow coaches? Anything we're forgetting?
I had a quick question about your advice on how to handle the why this company question. Because if you're doing 5 or 6 interviews, you may not have a great reason why, but you also don't want to say I like wine or I like dogs, so I want to come work for your company. So what's a good balance that you can find, or some ways that we can answer that question a little bit better?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I'm sure Holly gets this all the time, where it's like if someone's, why Mars, everyone always references dogs. And everyone loves dogs. We know that. So that's where, if you've done your homework, if you've networked, if you've talked to associates, that's where that's an opportunity to really show the interviewer the kind of the groundwork that you've been doing. So instead of being like, oh, I love dogs, and Nashville's fun, you can be like, well, I talked to, Colton, and he referenced, the culture there seems, blah, 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 blah. Or, I spoke with Matt, and the way that they, the emphasis on cross-functional teams and more general management seems like that would fit my, my talent repertoire better than just, really focusing on creative and traditional marketing. So it's you can talk. And so for Mars in particular, we are interested in people who are willing to stay in Nashville. And of course, you probably have to love dogs if you come here. So you can definitely mention those things, but that shouldn't be the cornerstone of, why do you want to work here?
You could probably get a lot of people who are like, I love wine, so I would love to work at a company that makes wine. And we all.
It's a great, there's a lot of people that are interested, yes, because they love wine, and that's great. And I would like to highlight what Matt said. I mean, the cultural stuff is really important. I would say even getting a little bit more specific, and this probably will happen as you're interviewing. For example, I was most interested in MBA rotational programs. So that was an easy thing to call out no matter what company
Yep,
you were
great
interviewing
point.
for or what company I was interviewing for. So I think that, you know, highlight the culture of the company, but you can also get a little bit more specific, probably just based on what your interests are. And again, that's just being authentically yourself.
I think too, you can talk to your chosen career trajectory. Like, for example, like one of the reasons why I picked Amazon is because I could do a lot of different things at the same company. A lot of people pick companies because they want to focus on one single company for their entire career and grow there. And maybe Amazon wouldn't be necessarily the place for you. There's like, for example, if you're interviewing in consulting, you're probably only going to be there for 2 years, but maybe you could, you know, when you're thinking about like, where do I want to be in 5 years, you can situate this job within the context of that. As long as you seem interested in doing the job and not seeming like you wanted it to be as a stepping stone. But for example, like when I was interviewing with Gallo for my internship, I really like talking about how, you know, you're marketing an intangible item. Like people don't really know what's in a bottle of wine. So there's a huge opportunity to be able to market wine in like in really interesting way because people don't necessarily know a lot about the product. But when I was giving the context of this question at Amazon, I was really interested in what I could do within the company and not necessarily be within, you know, specific functionality and rotate. So there's things that you learn and that might shift too as during your journey in MBA school too.
That's great. Thanks for that question and those answers. I know we're getting close to 12:50 and we don't have to use the full hour because I know you're all super busy, but any last questions from students? Anyone? You've asked great questions so far. If not, do you three, I guess, parting words of wisdom as everyone's about to we've moved past the craziness of mod 1. Now it's like this mod 2, like looking ahead. Everyone's like, oh yeah, I got to prep for interviews. So any words of wisdom on how people could prep or how they can approach those interviews in January or beyond, whether it's lessons learned for yourself or in your current role. Morgan, do you want to start?
Sure. I think don't hesitate to reach out to Owen Alumni if they work at a company that you are really interested in. That being said, don't waste their time. So show up to whatever coffee chat or virtual meeting you have prepared. Everybody's always willing to take a call or take a Zoom with an Owen student. So don't hesitate to use the network that you have now, because this is really when people are most likely to help you.
Matt, you want to go?
Sure. I guess this is less interview specific and more business school specific. But we had some individuals in our class who were really, the reason you're coming back to school is to get a job. So that should interview prep and networking and all that stuff should take priority over your classes. I'm not sure if I should be telling you this, but like classes should be the last thing on your mind realistically, because most companies that you work for, yeah, it's great to have that MBA foundation, but whatever you need to learn, they'll teach you on the job. So the most important thing is to get to the job. So focus on memorizing frameworks, practicing cases, doing what you can do to be prepared in that interview, because I'm not going to ask you, whether you had a high pass or a low pass for, Steve's marketing class. It's going to be how prepared are you in the next 45 minutes to an hour. So definitely focus on the priorities, which is, knocking these out of the park. Sorry, Amanda.
I will not disagree with that. So.
Great.
I would agree with Matt specifically on case interviews. I would say that the sooner you can feel comfortable with them, the better. And I went into it, again, I feel like I'm just like confessing all of, the things that I wish I'd done differently. But I feel like I went into case interviews feeling I had to memorize every framework for every different question I could get different ways, and just choose 2 of your favorites and roll with it, and find a buddy and go through as many as you can, because that's how you'll feel comfortable. That's how your authentic self will come out. If you're not like tripped up trying to, remember all the frameworks. So.
Thank you guys so much. You've had awesome advice. I was taking notes on things you were saying because I want to pass it along to people. That was great. And thank you all for joining and all your questions. And I really think, and I'm an Owen alum too, so I know this to be true because I was also in your shoes, that Owen alums are so, I just was saying this earlier, they're so willing to help. Like, we might not have 50 alums at certain companies, but like the ones who are there will go out of their way to help you if you come and like help them help you. So here's an example of 3 of them doing that now. And I know you've all helped many, many, many students while you're at Owen and after. So thank you guys so much for doing this today, and hope you all have a great weekend and Halloween. So thank you guys, and we'll hopefully see you all soon. We'll bring you back to campus.
I'm going to drop my email address in the comments. So if anybody's interested in Gallo, please feel free to reach out. We have all, any function, finance, marketing, IT, supply chain. Please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, same. I'm going to drop my email in the chat.
Yeah.
If you're interested in RLD, hit me up.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Right.
That
Thanks.
was great. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Bye, y'all.